From the European Parliament here in Brussels, this is Raw Politics. Thank you for joining us, and this is what we have coming up. All or nothing. The UK Prime Minister begins a critical push to sell Brexit before a parliamentary vote. Dangerous escalation. Russia fires on and seizes 3 Ukrainian naval vessels amid rising tensions. Bad medicine. A new report says lax European rules are to blame for rising rates of faulty implants and devices. MEP Varoufakis, the former bad boy of Greek politics, eyes a seat at the very institution he's described as broken and worth 1,000 words. The picture that got people talking at this weekend's Brexit summit. All right, it is time to meet our panel for this evening. We have, of course, Darren McCaffrey, our political editor at Euronews. Darren, which is the stories you like?
Hello. I think the Ukraine-Russia potential escalation, the Ukrainian conflict, we called it the frozen conflict before. It's almost the secret one because it has, on low-lying ways, been carrying on for the last couple of years. The question is what happens next? Of course, Ukraine needs to protect its integrity, but there is that risk of escalation depending on how they react.
It probably isn't anymore. All right, joining us as well is Nick Guttridge. He's a Brussels reporter for the Sun newspaper in the UK. Nick, which of the stories do you like?
Hello. I love the Varoufakis one. I'd have to go for that.
Isn't it ironic?
The guy's a brilliant character. It's really ironic. I'm sure he knows what he's doing.
Yes.
He's a guy who's going
to
come in somewhere like here and really shake it up and make a bit of noise.
No, absolutely. He wouldn't be Varoufakis if he didn't, right? All right, and Julie Girling. She's a British MEP with the Conservatives and belongs to the European People's Party in Parliament. Julie, which of these stories do you like?
Well, it's got to be Brexit for me, hasn't it? That's what it's been for the last few months and will be for a few more.
Yeah. A few more months. I know.
Yes.
No, but it's only in the last few months anyone wanted to talk to an MEP about it.
No, you never know.
They've caught up, but we actually know what's going on.
But Brexit, that is exactly where we are starting tonight, because the hard work begins back home. After she succeeded in getting a Brexit deal signed off in Brussels, the British Prime Minister Theresa May is kicking off her 2-week campaign to sell it in Britain before a divided Parliament votes on it likely on the 12th of December. Now, her main message, rejecting her deal, will only lead to more uncertainty and division, a line towed by newly appointed Brexit Secretary Stephen Barclay.
Well, we need to be clear with colleagues as to what the deal delivers. It delivers on the referendum, but also clear on what the alternative is, which is uncertainty from no deal or uncertainty from no Brexit, entering into uncharted waters if this deal doesn't go through. So it's time to come together as a country, deliver on the deal, and ensure that we give businesses and our citizens the certainty they need.
All right, Nick, can you bring us what it looks like in the UK, the numbers? What's it looking like now in Parliament?
Not good, really not good, if you're Theresa May at least. Anyway, maybe if you're Jeremy Corbyn, it's looking a bit better. 90-plus Tory MPs are saying they're really unhappy with this and probably aren't going to vote for it. And no one else is going to help her out. Labour are going to vote against it, the Lib Dems will, the SNP will. The DUP don't like it either. So she's got a hell of a couple of weeks ahead of her to try and pull something fairly miraculous out of the bag.
Julie, how do you think she could talk to politicians and probably get them on her side?
Well, she's putting a lot of pressure on Tories, for example, saying you will be responsible for pushing us over the cliff edge. I think that's the major argument she's using, is it's irresponsible of any grown-up politician to choose. This may not be perfect, in fact it's quite imperfect, but it's irresponsible to choose the cliff edge instead of it. Most of them are saying, hang on a minute, don't give us that. You've been at this for over 2 years. And why should we be in the position where we're told you've left it so late to bring it to us that there's no time for us to do anything about it? So they're not actually buying that. And she's managed miraculously to join up extreme leavers and extreme remainers in common cause to support a deal that delivers nothing to anybody. So I'm afraid she's on a hiding to nothing.
So what about Darren talking to the public to pressure MPs?
Yeah, this is interesting, isn't it? And I think what was it, David Cameron in 2015 during the general election campaign said that you risk chaos and uncertainty if you voted for Ed Miliband, which was slightly ironic given what's happened in the intervening years. A similar strategy being used by Theresa May. May. But yet she thinks, and this is potentially the only way she might be able to convince some Conservative MPs, is by trying to get the public on her side. And I think there is evidence that actually the British public are quite sympathetic to Theresa May. There's a great admiration for her perceived resilience during this process, the fact that she's still there and she's still fighting, despite the fact that her job has been in doubt for many months. And while Julie's right in the point that, and I think Tony Blair was making this point yesterday, that Brexiteers hate this deal, Remainers don't like it because obviously it still means that you leave. Who does like it? But I think the public do, or a certain
Even
section of population.
Brexiteers, you think?
No, they don't agree with that. But I think the public in the middle actually think that this probably is a good deal, the deal that the best deal that she probably could have got. And at the end of the day, we're all the public, because the public aren't all Remainers, they aren't all Brexiteers. Most people probably think Britain should leave, but not leave in a hard Brexit.
Yeah, but she's
in a hard Brexit.
You know, I would say, like, OK, nobody knows the actual numbers. Let's say roughly 30% go on at any cost, 30% stay at any cost, and then everyone else is in the middle. And those people in the middle are listening to the arguments. And what they're being told at the moment by the Prime Minister is, look, I've moved heaven and earth. I've been up 7 days a week, 24 hours a day for literally years. You know, listen to me. She's getting the sympathy vote. I completely agree with you, but it won't last more than 2 or 3 days, because then people move into the next phase, which is that really the best you could do?
All right.
And those people in the middle, at roughly 40%, I don't think they'll fall for this support me because, you know, I've tried so hard.
Nick, I'll give you 5 seconds to finish off.
I was just going to say that the public like her. I mean, when her deal is polled, it's not, or at least when Chequers that she was proposing is polled, it's actually very, very unpopular. You know, this is a classic piece of Eurofudge, which is pretty much impossible to sell because it's so technical. It's been bodged together.
But that's why even on this side, because the EU27 may have given Mrs May's deal their stamp of approval, but behind all the talk of unity, actually leaders made no secret of ensuring that their own interests were protected. That's in tonight's Brexit Brief.
We will remain friends until the end of days, and one day longer.
Enduring friendship may have been the message of the day in Brussels, as leaders took less than an hour to show their support for Britain's Brexit plan. But behind the scenes, a warning. Remember this? French and British vessels clashing off the coast of Normandy amid a spat over fishing rights. Emmanuel Macron certainly hasn't forgotten. He fired a fresh warning to Mrs May on the sidelines of Sunday's summit. He wants his fishermen to have guaranteed access to British waters. If not, he said, Britain will remain locked in the customs backstop. And he's not the only one playing domestic politics. Cyprus wants assurances too. Guarantees that Britain won't have any privileged access when it comes to foreign and security policies. To do so could mean leaving the door open for others to do the same. And after threatening to derail Sunday's summit altogether, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez managed to use events to his advantage. He claimed victory on the issue of Gibraltar, saying Mrs May had agreed to Spain's demands. I mean, as you were saying, Nick, it's so hard to get everybody on board. It's a fudge because it is hard to please everybody. But, you know, the domestic politics is always in the minds of politicians. It's always a card that they will pull out. This is what we can expect.
Absolutely, what you just saw there. Look, this has opened up a complete Pandora's box of things. I mean, what I was going to say is that this thing's been cobbled together by two sides who were frankly making it up as they went along, and the EU have just been better at making it up and better at disguising that they were making it up. And yet they are now finding out all kinds of things about it, and they're going, what's this, what's that? You know, fishing came up as a big issue, Gibraltar. The latest is Cyprus is going, oh, hold on a minute. Turkey's going to look at this and they're going to start getting ideas.
Can we think that this is all swept under the rug now, that everybody just wants the deal to get through?
Well, there is a sort of fatigue about the whole thing, for sure. But there's also a growing understanding that how incredibly big a deal this is for the future of the country. And this deal is really about a 20-month extension period. That's actually all that yesterday delivers to the UK, is 20 more months to sort out what's actually going to happen at the end. And I think Mrs May's playing a dangerous game, leaving 2 weeks to the vote, because to me that's the essential thing that the British public are going to catch on to in the next 2 weeks, is that this isn't a done deal. This doesn't put it to bed. It will go on and on. It's only about giving us 20 more months to listen to politicians going on about this.
Is it just 20 more months, Darren? I don't
not
think
just
you
politicians.
think...
I mean, what is interesting is the expected date now of this vote is the 12th of December, which is a Wednesday. On the Thursday, Friday of that week is an EU Council summit. In theory, she is meant to be here.
Yep.
How difficult it would be for her, and indeed for Britain, if that obviously was voted down, if her deal did not go through the Houses of Parliament. And we really would be. I mean, Theresa May is actually right in saying we would then be in very, very uncertain.
Will we be back to square one, really? Back to square one.
Well, the strong view in London is that she's having the vote on the Wednesday so that the ramifications in the markets can be seen over the next few days, so that she can then make a tiny, tiny tweak and have another vote, because she's got another week of Parliament. They don't break up until the next Thursday.
Yeah.
So she's got a time to, maybe rush in, which would give those 90 Tories who said they won't vote a good reason to change their mind and say, OK, I will vote. But we'll see, because I'm not sure how, will the...
But it's really a political chess game now.
It's back to London,
it really is.
for Westminster shenanigans.
For now, and it's far from over. We may have your deal on the table, but it is far from over. All right, let's move on first to another major story we are watching. The UN Security Council is holding an emergency meeting, and Ukraine has implemented martial law to address an escalating tension with Russia. This is after Russia fired upon and seized 3 Ukrainian naval vessels on Sunday, injuring several Ukrainian soldiers. Now, it happened in the Black Sea. The 3 Ukrainian vessels were sailing from Odessa to Mariupol in the Sea of Azov through the Kerch Strait, and Russia says the ships entered its territorial waters. Ukraine denies that. The 3 vessels were blocked by a tanker under a newly built Russia bridge, then rammed and seized along with Ukrainian sailors. Now, here's what the Ukrainian President Poroshenko had to say.
Я звертаюся до керівництва Російської Федерації з вимогою негайно звільнити українських військовослужбовців, які в порушенні міжнародного права брутально були затримані і доля яких невідома. Ми вимагаємо терміново їх передати українській стороні разом з кораблями і терміново зробити деескалацію ситуації, яка склалася в Азовському морі, як перший крок, і деескалацію по іншим напрямкам. Просив би, щоб реакція на це була достатньо швидкою.
All right, joining me for this panel to discuss it with us is Claire Moody, a British Labour MEP from the group of Socialists and Democrats, and Niels Torvalds, a Finnish MEP with the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats. All right, let us talk about what is happening now. We know that Donald Tusk and Macron has called for the return of the sailors from Ukraine. All right, how dangerous is this escalation that we're seeing right now?
Well, in a way, not dangerous for the moment, because I think what the Russians are doing, they are looking where they have all the aces in their hands, and then they're acting, and that's what happened in when they occupied Crimea, and that's what's happened when they went into Ukraine. That's happened when they went into Syria. So they are always looking for the weak spots where the other part actually doesn't have many possibilities of answering.
Is there something to be made of the timing? I mean, did we see this coming? It seems like it just came out of the blue.
No, this has been building up for weeks. I mean, the building of the bridge to Crimea and the activity in the Kerch Straits has been, escalating over time. So that in and of itself shouldn't come as a surprise. I think the key point now is, once again, the international community have to act in coordination with each other and take a firm response to this. It is really important that the Ukrainian people are returned to Ukraine and the ships.
And who was provoking whom? I mean,
well,
there's
it's really
two sides
interesting,
of this
isn't
story.
it? So obviously the Kerch Bridge was built by Russia. It links Crimea to the Russian mainland. It is something that Ukraine views as very much,
it's an aggression, I think, is how
an
they
act of
view.
aggression.
Yeah.
Now, Russia, in the last few months, as far as I understand, or since March, have used the issue of security and tried to protect that bridge as a way of trying to inspect ships that travel under it. And from what I understand, the Ukrainians are claiming that they had given prior notice that they were going to sail through this because it is an incredibly important trade route for Ukraine. So the Russians knew they were coming. And now there was a ship.
I think they said they didn't. They weren't warned.
Yeah, but there was a ship underneath the bridge, literally to block them.
Okay.
And I think we have to assume that Russia did know they were coming, and that this is an act of aggression by Russia. The question is, though, there have been, as you say, lots of acts of aggression by Russia. How do you deal with it? And this is the problem for Ukraine. What more sanctions against Russia? That has not worked.
Yeah.
More military escalation and weapons. I was in Ukraine a few weeks ago, Tess, or at the end of September. There are still people dying in this conflict every single month. It is not going away.
I think it's at the 10,000
so the question is,
now.
what does Kiev, what does Brussels, what does Washington do?
And very, very quickly, what is the end game for Russia?
Well, they have all the aces. So the problem, first of all, this didn't came out of the blue. Absolutely. Everybody was actually waiting for it. But what are the possibilities for the West to answer?
Right.
Actually, zero. Because we are naive. We have, I think, a tendency to be very sort of trying to stay off from conflict. And when we do that, we actually give the Russians more room for maneuver. So I think we played ourselves in a bad hand.
Ukraine has wasted no time in pushing their narrative of events. Both sides have been doing that, taking to social media to point the finger at Russia. Alex Morgan and our team in The Cube have more on why Poroshenko's government is going on a campaign blitz internationally and at home. Alex?
Tessa, have a look at this. These are the cover images of 3 very significant Twitter accounts. And look at the top of all of them. Hashtag Russia attacks Ukraine. Then below, hashtag Russia attacks Ukraine. And then at the very bottom, Russia invaded Ukraine. These are the accounts of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the President's Office and the Office of the Deputy Prime Minister. And if these are not featured in the cover images, we are seeing the Prime Minister and other very prominent officials in Ukraine using this hashtag Russia attacks Ukraine. This is coordinated. It's very clear that Ukraine and the Ukrainian officials, the government, are wanting to own the narrative here and to put out their message. And indeed, in the hours after that incident took place, the office of the President, Petro Poroshenko, tweeting this, using the hashtag to explain to citizens about this vote taking place in the parliament, using the exact phrase here, martial law. These are extraordinary times. Here, that hashtag being used in connection with the office of the president, suggesting the country needs martial law. Now, what exactly does martial law look like for Ukraine? Well, needless to say, it is an exceptional state of affairs, and there are fears it could interfere, postpone upcoming presidential elections. But still, this move, this call for the parliament to back the president's desire for martial law to be imposed, was supported by the National Defense and Security Council. So there's a parliamentary elections that it could interfere with coming up in Ukraine. Now, those moves are backed up here by the National Defense and Security Council, who support President Petro Poroshenko's move. But it's fair to say that while this coordinated campaign from the Ukrainian side has existed on social media, the Russians haven't been absent from putting out their side of events. Let's bring up what the Ministry of Foreign Affairs had to say in Crimea. Well, they issue a warning to the European Union, to Washington, to what they see as, Western backers of the Ukrainian government. They say quite clearly here, this is a provocative move by Ukraine. They very much saying this is a staged incident, and the Western nations standing by Ukraine need to be careful. They also go on to say, tweeting again, that the Russian embassy in the United States saying, we've got evidence that this was a staged provocation. So we are seeing, Tessa, a narrative from the Russians. But I think, just going back to this, what we are seeing from the Ukrainians is straight out the gate, a coordinated social media campaign pushing their side of the story.
All right, thank you for that, Alex and the Cube team. Claire, what do you think about, how is martial law reaction to what happened, with Russia and those sailors? How is that a reaction? Is Petro Poroshenko exploiting this incident for his own purposes, elections, that he could possibly lose?
I would say that it would be much better for Petro Poroshenko to be focusing on, looking at the Security Council, looking at the OSCE response. I am not convinced that this internal rapid response is the right response for Ukraine right now. But the Rada are obviously debating that as we speak, and we will see where they get to.
Because it does take the attention out of the Russia-Ukraine. It brings it back to.
I think it's grandstanding. Well, martial law in Ukraine. What
is it? What's purpose of
There's no difference. They're just sort of playing with words without any real assets to do anything substantial about it, and that I find disturbing.
What do you think, Darren?
Well, I think when it comes to it, martial law is not going to solve this situation, and indeed he may well be doing it for his own political gain, because it would lead to the suspension of those elections next year. I think the big question is what does happen next? How many times can Russia get away with this? And if they do, what should the response be? Is it Donald Trump's idea of selling more missiles and weapons to Ukrainians and trying to train the Ukrainian soldiers more? Is that not likely to prompt more deaths, particularly in the east of the country?
Which we have.
And the problem with sanctions is sanctions clearly, particularly when it comes to Ukraine, have not worked. So this is the big conundrum, and there is no easy, obvious answer to it.
Doing nothing shouldn't be a response either.
But what to do? Because you can't put boots on the ground. Because that would be the real answer. And if you can't put boots on the ground, then you are without any measures to come.
So that is really the question. And how does one react to what is going on between Russia and Ukraine? All right, a lot more coming up on Raw Politics for you this evening. A new dark horse in the race to lead Europe. Yanis Varoufakis, the man who was previously at loggerheads with EU leaders, is officially running to be an MEP and Commission President. Plus, more PR woes for the French President Emmanuel Macron. What began as nationwide protests over fuel prices in the country have ignited a much larger and angrier movement that's taking aim at the French leader. Don't go away. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, faced with the slumping approval ratings and the specter of violent anti-government street protests, French President Emmanuel Macron is scheduled to address disgruntled French voters tomorrow. Over the weekend, luxury shops on the Champs-Élysées were vandalized and barricades were set ablaze as more than 100,000 turned out to voice their anger. Police say 30 people were injured and 101 were arrested. A movement known as the Yellow Vests that began on social media earlier this month as a response to a tax on fuel has morphed into a wider movement against Macron's policies, and it reportedly has the support of around 75% of the French public. Macron is not expected to scrap the tax, but rather introduce measures to soften its impact on low-income families. President Macron's response to the protests in a widely criticized tweet, he said, "Thank you to our law enforcement for their courage and professionalism. Shame on those who attacked them. Shame on those who have abused other citizens and journalists. And shame on those who have tried to intimidate elected officials. No room for this violence in our republic." Well, joining me to mull over Mr. Macron's domestic woes, we have Dharmendra Kanani, the Director of Strategy at Friends of Europe, Pauline Bock, a contributor to the New Statesman, and Andrew Byrne, the Sunday Times Brussels correspondent. All right, when we look at what's happening in France, Pauline, I'll start with you being you are French. How precarious is this for Emmanuel Macron?
I think it's very dangerous. He's at a moment where he could still try and address their concerns, the people who are protesting and the people who agree with the protesters but are not protesting. However, I doubt that he will do so tomorrow night on TV, because that would mean walking back, stepping back and saying, I was wrong with this tax, I was wrong with some of my policies. And if he really wants to address their concerns, he should say, okay, I'm going to roll back some taxes, some fiscal policies I have done, for example. What he should really be doing is not only taxing the poor, low-income families, the ones who feel them the most, but also higher incomes and rich people. And that he has not done. He's cut a lot of taxes for the rich. And I don't think he will.
I mean, in looking at the previous presidents, he has held his ground the longest, I think, of all of the presidents. He's not going to change his mind on this one. It's become it's more than tax on fuels.
It is.
Now.
It is. You know, there's something about him that feels like a leader interrupted. He has such an ambitious agenda and a good agenda, and he needs to remind himself of why he was elected. Really. And actually, the text message is so revealing that he's actually forgetting the basis on why people wanted public reform, wanted modernisation of services. And somehow he's trying to do too much too quickly, and he's not picking his battles effectively, and he's actually alienating the voter base that actually put him in power. And leaders, you know, sometimes get in a situation of being egotistical about the power they have. And I'm not saying that he is in that position. He's trying to do too much, both on the European stage, global stage, and domestically. And the advice to him would be actually go back to basics, go back to your voter base. And actually, the messages you should be sending is about why it's important to have domestic reform. And he's the one leader that's actually got the groundswell of opinion, and originally, 18 months ago, to achieve that, and he's squandering that
But
away.
he hasn't backed away from a fight, and he's not about to start now.
No, and I mean, on this particular fight, I mean, we should keep it in context. The tax rise that he's talking about on carbon tax here is quite minimal. It's about, I think, 11% over 5 years, which is quite small. I mean, French motorists pay less for their tank of fuel than do people in Germany, in Italy, or in the UK. But I suppose it's a good example that sometimes it's the small things that trip you up, that you don't pick the right battles.
Do the French not care about the environment?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, I think I'm struck by the fact that one of the other big damaging incidents for him this year was the resignation of his very popular Environment Minister, Nicolas Hulot. And he said when he resigned live on radio, he said the trouble is being an environmentalist in France is that there's no protests in the street for the environment in France, or in most countries. And so in this case, I think it's another example of it. You pick a small measure, it has a good reasoning, and it has a clear aim, but it obviously irritates a very important constituency.
And also, we were just looking at some of the analysis, is that his hands seem to be tied because he wants to work with the Greens, because his popularity is so low. And is that partly playing into this?
Well, he wanted to work with the Greens when he began as well, and then Hulot resigned. So I think there is this wish to try again. But once again, if you address the message for all the population, if you make a big effort for everyone as a domestic policy, it could work. He could tell the French people.
Exactly. If we went back to the basics of these arguments he used in that 6 months before, it raised the emotions towards something that's better for everybody. And he's gone into segments. And actually, one thing that he couldn't predict was his economy. You know, it's got 100% deficit against its GDP. He couldn't have forecasted that when he was, trumping reform. But actually, his analysts would have told him that this is happening. How do you work tactically with that, rather than simply, what he's doing is defend and block, rather than engage and remind people about why it's important to have these reforms, which will make it better for the French citizen.
But it's important to remind them why he's doing this.
Exactly.
But he also has to be just in the way he's doing it. And that's why they're so angry.
Yes.
It is not just. They don't see it as just.
Yes,
they see it as we are the only ones paying. He's cut the tax
isn't it also
with the rich, and now we're paying again.
Isn't it also a question of style, though? And that I think Le Monde wrote that he is distant, out of touch, and too focused on urban voters. And if Le Monde says you're too elitist and too focused on urban voters, then you're really in trouble.
You're slightly in trouble.
And I mean, on the one hand, he's portrayed. He said he has this Jupiterian presidency. He wants to be kind of the lost king for France. On the other hand, he's criticised for being out of touch. So maybe it's time for a little humility on his part, even on the basis of style.
Precisely. Go back to the notion of public service and remind himself of why he entered and what he wants to do.
So do you think
he seems to have lost that?
So if he does that rhetoric, he says, okay, I'm sorry, this is my fault, and this is why it's important, without actually changing the tax on fuel, will that work?
No.
Not necessarily, no, because the tide's gone. I mean, the tide's out on that. But actually, if you were to think about the midterm rather than the immediate, if he were to say, imagine a leader being able to say, I got some of this wrong, people would trust him more. If he said, actually, I need to go back to reminding you about why I came to power, and this is what I want to change.
Can he admit that he's wrong, though? Does he have the ability to do that? Or
I think our modern politics doesn't allow it. The media doesn't allow it because they see its failure.
The problem is also that he always thought that he was elected because everyone believed in his program. That was never the case. He was elected against Marine Le Pen. He was elected to block Le Pen. Some people believed in his policies. He got 24% in the first round, but that's about it. The other people voted against Le Pen, and if he alienates them now,
and
he's not going to win next time.
Probably not the end of the protest as we know it yet. Probably going to see a lot more in the coming weeks. All right. It's time for tonight's Power Play. As political parties up their ante ahead of the next year's EU elections, one group in Germany have an unlikely candidate. Let's take a look. It was described as a revolution at the time, the Arab Spring, a series of pro-democracy protests that shook nations to their cores. Now, one ex-Greek finance minister is proposing his very own revolution. Brandishing posters reading European Spring, supporters of Yanis Varoufakis gathered at a press conference in Berlin this weekend as the former Greek finance minister unveiled his plans to stand in next year's European elections for Germany.
On paper, this country is drowning in money. German people have been victims of the same austerity as the rest of Europe.
Known for his strong stance against austerity measures in Greece, Varoufakis said the political center in Germany is under threat for the same reasons. I mean, truth is really sometimes stranger than fiction. What? Varoufakis in Germany? What is he playing?
I mean, I think it is a measure of the extent to which he has exhausted the patience of the Greek people and irritated his own voters so much that he has to travel to Germany to run there. And I think that's an illustration of how much he's failed to deliver on his promises.
But what Germans think now?
I mean, exactly. One might say actually it's the Europeanization or the globalization of politics, i.e. politics can stand anywhere. But this is kind of slightly tactical, slightly Machiavellian, and really not trustworthy.
I agree. And he makes me think of Manuel Valls, Alonso, former Prime Minister, who is also now running in Barcelona.
But there you go. At least he's from Barcelona.
It's true.
He says he's a resident of Germany.
Grace,
He says he just meet the qualifications. All right, we'll watch out for Varoufakis then, what his next move is. After the break on Raw Politics, a new report takes blames lax European laws for faulty medical devices and implants that are killing thousands of people every year. Stay with us. Welcome back. It is a chilling report if you or someone you know has a medical implant or device. According to the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, thousands are suffering and dying every year because of faulty medical devices, and Europe is at the epicenter of that scandal. Last year in the UK, more than 19,000 adverse incidents were reported. In France, just over 18,000. And Germany had about 14,000 adverse incident reports. But the report warns that those numbers could actually be much higher, citing lack of available data. Now, as for who is affected, the report names pacemakers, rods to correct spinal problems, prosthetic knee and hip joints, and thousands of other devices. It blames lax European regulation, saying in many cases implants were improperly tested or certified by private companies. And it says that a, quote, storm of lobbying has led to the watering down of EU law. All right, this investigation was inspired by Dutch investigative journalist Jet Schouten, who led a sting operation and convinced private companies responsible for assessing devices that mesh netting from a bag of mandarin oranges was surgical mesh. Joining us now from Amsterdam, Jet, good to see you there. So can you tell us, I mean, this investigation that you did, it was a tip of the iceberg. Can you tell us about that and how big the iceberg really is?
Yes, hi, nice to be here. Yes, well, in 2015, we wanted to test the system in Europe because we heard there were lots of problems with these so-called private bodies, these notified bodies, because in Europe we have a system where if you want to approve a medical device, you go to a commercial private notified body and you basically pay this body to get a stamp, the CE mark, and if you have it, you can go all on the EU market to sell your product as a manufacturer. So we wanted to test the system, and we thought in order to test the system, we have to make our product, our implant, really ridiculous to see how the scrutiny is of these private bodies. So we went to the supermarket, we bought a bag of mandarins, we discarded the mandarins, and we told the notified bodies, would you approve this? And of course we had a technical file where we wrote all specifications, and we said basically it was a vaginal mesh. And well, these notified bodies, they asked us some questions about the product. but they didn't ask us any questions like about safety of the product or about the fact that at the time in 2015, this vaginal mesh was already widely known to be scarring and harming women on a global base. So basically they said, well, we don't really see any harm in approving this product. So this was a shock for us. We went undercover and they told us basically.
The beginning.
It was the beginning. Yeah. So after this report, you know, I was contacted by journalists from other countries, but also by lawyers and also by patients from all around the world asking me, hey, what you say there about the vaginal mesh, that's happening in our country too. Can we have your documents? Can we work together?
Is the EU to blame in this?
Well, the thing is, everybody thinks that in the EU there is a very sound regulation, and in fact there is not, because the system to approve a medical device, it's a commercial business-to-business system. So as a manufacturer, you go to this a private organization called a notified body, and you get the CE mark, and all on the EU you can sell your product. So it's very strange that if you compare it to, for example, the United States, where you have one organization, the FDA, approving a product, here in Europe we don't. Okay. And that means that we lack the oversight, the central oversight on what is happening on the EU market.
I think that is the crux of the problem indeed. Thank you very much for that, Dutch investigative journalist Jet Schouten, talking to us there from Amsterdam. And joining us now to take a closer look at the political implications of the scandal, we have Biljana Borzan, a Croatian MEP with the SND group. Biljana is a member of the Public Health Committee and has followed this issue very closely. And still with me is Pauline Bok and Dharmendra Kanani. All right, let's start with you, Biljana. What is the role of the EU here? We just heard from the journalist that there is no centralized system. Why not?
Well, I have to say that we changed this legislation in the Parliament, but in the first reading, my political group, Socialists and Democrats, wanted this centralized agency or to have the system more similar to American system. But unfortunately, it means a centralized system, and then we will have a full control of everything that's going on the European level. And maybe we can avoid many situations or adverse effects that happened. But unfortunately, we didn't get enough support from the other political groups, and I think that there was lots of lobbying, and unfortunately our proposal is not as tight as we wanted.
I mean, this is a point I wanted to bring up, the lobbying, because I was reading through one of the Parliament documents. It says here that some substances are carcinogenic, mutagenic or toxic for reproduction, but it says here that a full ban was unacceptable to both the Council and Commission due to the potential impact on industry.
Exactly.
I mean, this
strikes at the heart of the issue in terms of the balance between vested interests or industry, if you want to call it that, versus consumers and citizens. And it's quite striking, I think, in a year before elections, that the European body politic is not thinking hard about how do you create trust amongst citizens. This is an example of where you actually remove trust, because those who are elected, appointed through taxpayers' money to make sure you are safe and secure, are squandering or really not upholding their responsibilities. The other issue, I think, is that actually this is a gender issue. If you think about the low-level transplants and the devices, vaginal meshes, breast implants, etc., are the key, more voluminous issues that are there. Would it be different if it was actually to do with men, I wonder, in terms of the industry?
I mean, but the numbers are staggering. Is this one of those issues where government interference and more government regulation is probably more welcome?
Well, it would be welcome to have any kind of data, really, because at least in France, the Le Monde investigation, because each country had journalists who then did their own investigation and tried to get as much data as possible. Le Monde couldn't get any data, almost. It took them a month, and several organizations that they had to ask several times for the most basic amount of data. And when they finally got some documents, most of them were blank. So it's not just about regulation. It's also about trying to get people to actually fill the data and to actually centralize everything, as you were saying, because for now there's nothing.
So where can the pressure come from that can instigate change?
Well, of course, from the industry. It's they are the most important who are interested not to have such a tight legislation. I have to say that those who didn't want our centralized system, they said that that system is pretty slow and that patients need much faster legislation and much faster medical devices on the market. And I agree that sometimes in some medical situations you need
for innovation, to encourage innovation.
Everything, but as a medical doctor, I think that quality of medical device is much more important than if you want it very fast on the market.
There shouldn't be a trade-off between speed and health. They should be entwined, and actually you can take a more proportionate approach. There are devices which are needed in the market which you can create a process around. There are those which are the humdrum stuff that people need all the time, which have a different approach. But this report reveals, which is great, power to the elbow of journalists actually, to actually raise the issue and say, actually, some of these devices aren't tested on humans.
So will it not hurt industry?
Sorry?
Will it not hurt industry?
I don't think so, not at all. This is actually a question of actually how industry is hurting its own market. Because through these kind of exposés, you get an awareness, and I hope you maintain that awareness. Actually, something needs to give, and what needs to give is governance. You and your political parties and peers really need to ratchet up the need for a better governance arrangement in Europe that instills trust and proper oversight. Otherwise, we'll have a similar situation to what we had with the banks, the oversight of banks that led to the financial crisis. We'll have a similar situation here if we don't get the governance.
As what you were saying, what was shocking about this report also is that the fact that the medical devices were tested not on humans, on animals, and on corpses, even, according to the report. All right, after the break on Raw Politics, tens of thousands of protesters have taken to the streets of Europe to demonstrate against violence against women, as new figures reveal how devastating and deadly gender violence is. Do stay with us.